All right, good morning, everyone. It's time to get started. Maybe a little past time. I want to briefly just kind of, because of what we're looking at in the chapter of Mark today, some of the territory that Jesus and his disciples are going to be traveling. I want to try to bring up something, kind of show you, kind of give you a perspective of exactly how far they're traveling, what's going on. The first thing that I wanted to show you, and I have a copy of this if somebody wants to take it with you. This is the family tree of Herod the Great. And when you're reading in the Gospels, many times it will just mention Herod. It doesn't tell you which one. And so sometimes it helps to be able to see that. So up at the top you have Herod the Great. You see the children that he had, and these are the ones that survived because he killed some of them. He killed a couple of them, and killed at least one wife. But if you were to look at this, when you see Herod Philip married his niece, you see Herod Antipas. It's pretty much the same thing. You have Herod Philip II, married within the family. And when you read through this, look at this family tree, they were pretty sick people. They were, I don't know, Bill Clinton, Jeffrey Epstein, kind of a mess, and that may be unfair to Herod. I don't think he was quite that bad, but anyhow, it was quite a mess. And so when and let's see this next slide, Herod had an incredible kingdom he built that he had established there. Had quite a bit of territory, and came close to losing his life a couple of times. Had to pull in some favors from Rome to be able to be there. When he died, his kingdom was divided up between some of his sons. He left a will in place, and when the will was read, none of the children liked it, and they all went to Rome. Each one of them tried to get Rome to change the will, and finally said, no, we're going to leave it like it is. So you had this area right here was Archelaus, and if you remember, when Joseph and Mary and Jesus were in Egypt and they got ready to come back, it mentions when Joseph found out that Archelaus was over Judea, that's why he did not go there. Archelaus, from everything I read, was kind of a loose cannon. In fact, he was so out of control of Rome, shortly after he took over, they removed him and put somebody else in place. But the kingdom was divided at the time that Jesus came along. And so when you read about in the Gospels, sometimes it'll just mention a Herod, and sometimes it helps to be able to have an idea of which Herod they're talking about. But what I also wanted you to see, because in this chapter, Jesus is going to go from Gennesaret. Gennesaret was a stretch of land. You see up there at the top, the Sea of Galilee. On the western side of the Sea of Galilee was a stretch of land called Gennesaret. And it was an extremely fertile piece of land. In fact, the rabbis referred to it as the Garden of God. Walnuts, fruits, all kinds of fruits, figs, grapes. In fact, I think for some of the fruits there, they had like a 10-month harvest season. Now imagine if you could harvest something for 10 months out of the year. But the fruit was so good from there. Shows you how anal these rabbis and people could be. They would not allow any of that fruit to be sold in Jerusalem during the major festivals, because they were afraid that people would only come to the festival to buy the fruit and not come there to be at the festival. So they would not allow it. But it was an extremely fertile area, and so Jesus goes from there And if you look up on the Phoenicia, we're going to see today where he goes to Tyre and Sidon area where he meets the Syro-Phoenician woman. He's going to be there for a while, and then eventually he's going to come down to this green area called the Decapolis. So he's going to cover probably a couple hundred miles traveling with these disciples. And one of the things we're going to see right at the beginning is Jerusalem is right here. And to go from there up to where the Pharisees are going to encounter Jesus is about 100 miles on foot. And this is, I don't know if you've ever walked that far. Back in those days, most people could cover 20 miles in a day. Now, I don't know if you've ever. I know Roxy's a marathon guy, runner. I don't know if has anybody here ever walked 20 miles in one day? I did it one time, and that's because I was a youth minister and didn't have any choice with a project that was going on. And I vowed I would never do that again unless I had to, because it is quite a challenge. But this is what they did. This is how they traveled. So I just wanted to kind of give you a perspective on that. I want to back up just for a second before we get into chapter 7. Tim did an excellent job last Sunday, and I'm not just saying that because your mom and dad are here, okay, and your brother, but did an excellent job on the feeding of the 5,000. What I wanted to kind of dovetail in with that is when Jesus gave them this challenge, he says, look, you need to give them something to eat. And they're like, how are we going to do that? That's impossible. I read somewhere where the disciples were the perfect example of a committee. And they define a committee as a group of individuals who can't do anything and collectively say nothing can be done. Now, I don't know if you've ever been a part of a committee, but there's been times I've been a part of a committee that I felt certain was instigated by Satan himself. Now, I will say that our search committee here is an exception to the rule because they obviously did a good job. So not all committees are bad. But the disciples were like, we can't do this. It's impossible to feed these 5,000 people. And it was by themselves. So we know that they had 5 loaves and 2 fish. Mark doesn't mention this, but in John's gospel account, he tells us how we got the 5 loaves and 2 fish. It mentions Andrew, brother of Simon, and Andrew finds this boy, and he's got, I guess, maybe, I'm assuming it was a lunch that his mom packed for him, and he brings him to Jesus. I have this vision of him bringing him to Jesus, and Jesus saying, son, can I borrow your lunch? Sure. Okay. And then he takes it, and we know what happened, fed all the people. I've always wondered what happened to that little boy. That's the way I think. What did he do when he got home? Mom, you are not going to believe what happened today. And he begins to tell the story. And she says, son, I've told you about lying. Mom, I'm telling you. I'm telling you. I was there. I mean, there was all these people, and they didn't have anything to eat. And this guy asked me what's in my sack, and I tell him, and he takes me to the teacher, the guy from Nazareth. And he takes my lunch, and then all of a sudden, he's praying, and he's feeding all these people. And then he gives me my lunch back. I just, I'm sorry. I have brain damage from a long time ago, and so I just think about things like that. But the point of that is, I think, is that individually, and Dennis and I were just briefly talking about this, individually, sometimes as families, sometimes as churches, we face situations where it seems like there's no hope. And we think, how can we do this? And we can't on our own. And I think the story here is we don't have to feed the 5,000. We just need to bring the loaves and the fish and let God do it. Because I'm telling you, I've faced some things over the years where I'm like, there is no hope in this situation. There is none. I cannot do this. And that's what God, I think, is saying to us. Yeah, you can't do this. I know you can't do this. That's why I'm here. And so that's part of it. The second thing is, in the Gospel of John, Andrew is only mentioned 3 times. First time, he brings his brother Simon to meet Jesus. Second time is here. He brings this little boy to Jesus. The third time, he brings a group of Gentiles to Jesus. You see anything here? If I were to ask you to name some of the prominent apostles, very few people are going to mention Andrew. They're going to talk about Peter, James, and John. But look at what Andrew did. Andrew understood what his role was. His role was not necessarily to be the guys up there in front and leading the thing and preaching and all that kind of stuff. But he was a bringer. He brought people to Jesus. And he understood that. And what I like to think about that, what I try to tell my students, is that there's no such thing as a talentless person in this world. Every one of us, everyone in this room, everyone in this church, we have something to offer. It may be behind the scenes, whatever it is, but we have something, and we need to feel good about that. We need to feel okay about that, and just do that. And we should never, 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 never underestimate whatever our gift is and bring that to Jesus. Okay. Chapter 7. Our friends the Pharisees, it says in verse 1, they came from Jerusalem. Now they came from Jerusalem all the way up to where Jesus is, about 100 miles. They're going over 100 miles to see Jesus, but they're going there for the wrong reason. They're not going there because they want to find out the truth. They're not going there because they want to see, is this guy the Messiah? They're strictly going there to try to find him doing something wrong. That's it. They have no interest whatsoever in the truth. They have no interest whatsoever in what this man really is. And so they're so caught up in their traditions, they fuss about them. It says, your disciples, verse 5, why do your disciples not walk according to the, look at that, tradition of the elders, but eat their bread with impure hands? These guys were so anal about some of these things. It wasn't necessarily that the disciples were not washing their hands. They may not have. But they weren't washing their hands the right way. There's a right, it's like, okay, she's not in here. My idea of cleaning something is one thing. But it's not my wife's idea. And it don't make any difference how good it may look to me. If it's not up to her standards, I might as well just go do something else. Okay? It's got to be done the right way. It's got to be, And I'm still working on that. 40 years, I'm close, but I'm not there yet. I'm still working on it. All right. So the Pharisees, they had these ways they wanted to do things that were traditions, strictly tradition. It wasn't the law. But they had made it as if it was the law. I read somewhere trying to get an idea of what was this tradition, this way of washing hands, and there were several different things. There's a phrase where it says, washing with the fist. Somehow they used the fist to wash the hands. There was something else I read where when they washed their hands, they would hold their hands up like this so the water would drip off their elbow and not go back and contaminate the fingertips. Now that's a lot of trouble to wash your hands just to eat, anything, but that's what they did. And their traditions, they had made their traditions as binding on the people as the law of Moses. And so they come at Jesus and says, "Why your disciples? They are not doing things the right way." And then he comes at them. "Rightly did Isaiah the prophet prophesy of you hypocrites." By the way, Jesus is the only person in the New Testament record that uses that word hypocrite. And it's a powerful word. It is a word that has its origin in the theaters at that time. If you were an actor in a play on stage, most of them would wear a mask. If you were supposed to represent a character that was evil, you would have a mask that would have a very scary type face. If you were supposed to be someone who was happy or joyful, you'd wear that kind of mask. The thing was, where this word hypocrite comes from, is that you could wear this mask, and maybe the mask represented someone who was happy and there was a smile. But the person on the other side of that mask could be angry. They could be crying their eyes out, but you wouldn't know it because all you could see was the mask. So Jesus says, "You guys are hypocrites." And the way he does it, he quotes from Isaiah, says, "This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far away from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men." And he goes on and he shows us, he says, "You guys are exactly what Isaiah was talking about. You're taking something that is written by man and you are making it as on the same level as the law of God." And he gives them a specific example here. He says in verse 9 through 13, he says, "You know what the law says. Honor your father and mother." And it goes even into more detail later on. It says, "You are to take care of your parents as long as they are living, whatever they need. If it's a financial need, if it's a physical need, whatever it is." He says, "But you guys made a loophole." The Pharisees came up with a loophole called Corban in verse 11. And this was where if you were, not that I'm just going to pick on Dennis because we go way back, but let's just say we're stepping. Now, I can't pick on Tim because he's going to be here for a long time. So I can pick on you. So let's just say Dennis has got lots of money. And he may have, I don't know, but let's just say he does. And his mom and dad are in need. They need something. But Dennis doesn't necessarily want to help mom and dad. So what he would do is he would declare all his finances as Corban. They belong to God. And so he could say, "Mom, Dad, I would really love to help you, but my money belongs to God. You're on your own." God says, and Jesus says, you're pathetic. You're hypocrites. You are taking a tradition and not only making it evil, but you're making it superseding my Father's word. How dare you do that? Don't come talk to me about my disciples not washing their hands according to traditions when you're doing this. It's not going to fly. And then he goes in verse 14, he says, after this he called the crowd together. He says, "Listen to me, all of you, and understand there is nothing outside the man which can defile him if it goes into him. But the things which proceed out of the man are what defiles the man." When he had left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples questioned him about the parable. And he says, "Are you so lacking in understanding also? Do you not understand that whatever goes into the man from the outside cannot defile him?" When you read the scriptures, there's several times when you see Jesus get so frustrated with these guys. He's like, "Can you not get this? Do you not understand? Are you not paying attention?" He says, what goes into a man physically does not defile him, does not make him unclean. It's going to go in, and at some point it's coming out some way. He says, so that's what it is. He says, what defiles a man is what goes into his heart. And he goes into all the things that do that. Verse 23, all these evil things proceed from within and defile the man. And he's using the example. The Pharisees were so meticulous about washing their hands, washing the pots they cooked in, all these things as if that was going to defile them if they didn't do it. And he says, you're missing the point. It's not what goes that you take into your mouth and goes into your stomach. It's what goes into your heart, guys. That's what you have to work on. That is what is going to defile you. That's what's going to corrupt you. And that's where all these other things come from. In verse 24, it says that Jesus went up to the region of Tyre. Now, as I showed you a while ago, that is not even in Palestine. And so, why go up there? It appears that Jesus has gotten so popular in the Jewish area that he has no time to be alone with his disciples. And yes, he came here to teach. Yes, he came here to perform miracles. Yes, he did all these things. But he's also got to get these guys ready that he has chosen to take over when he goes back to his Father. And he doesn't have a lot of time to do it. So he needs time to be away from the crowds so that he can spend time teaching them, so he can prepare them, so he can mentor them to be ready. And it says in verse 24, when he entered the house, he wanted no one to know of it, yet he could not escape notice. His fame was traveling all over the place. He's in Gentile territory. Tyre and Sidon has a history going all the way back to Solomon of being a very pagan area, very pagan. And so this is not like home turf here. This is a foreign area, and he's hoping he can get away from the crowd so he can talk to his disciples. And then there's this. I would read this for years and couldn't understand this. It says, but after hearing of him, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately came and fell at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of the Syrophoenician race, and she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. This is not a one-time. She just stays after him. Please do this. Please do this. And he was saying to her, let the children be satisfied first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. When I would read that, I was like, Jesus called this woman a dog. I mean, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound like something Jesus would say. And this is where being able to have references and commentaries where you can explain this. Jesus was not necessarily insulting her. I mean, if you call some woman a dog today, you're going to be in trouble. I mean, you're going to be in trouble. Even if she looks like a dog, you're going to be in trouble. I mean, there is no way around it. You are in deep trouble. So he's not doing that. What he's saying here, he says, look, I'm here to teach these guys. And the children represents, it seems like represents these guys, or these 12 guys he's trying to teach them. The bread is what he's trying to feed them. And the dogs, he's using a image here of children being at a table, being fed, and the children being fed first. And if there's anything left, then, okay, you feed the family dog. So Jesus is telling this, and look what the woman says. But she said to him, yes, Lord, but even the dogs under the table feed on the children's crumbs. And he said to her, because of this answer, the demon has gone out of your daughter. And going back to her home, she found the child lying on the bed, the demons having left. This woman she knew she was a Gentile. What Jesus was saying, look, I've got to have some time. I've got to feed these guys right here before I deal with you. And she says, okay, I understand that. But even we get something out of this. And because of her answer, Jesus takes care of that for her. Now, as I was reading through this, and Tim and I were talking earlier, how I applied to how I looked at this for me. Jesus is taking this time I've got to prepare these guys when I'm not going to be here. I've got to get them ready. And I look back on it as a father that I should have spent more time doing things like that with my kids. I should have taken time to get away and try to find moments when I could really teach them. I think I did some things right, but I wasn't as deliberate about that. And I'm going to try to do a better job of that with my grandchildren. But I think it goes even maybe deeper than that. And by the way, this is being recorded, right? Okay, I'm not volunteering for this. I'm just making a statement. I'm just suggesting that, okay? I'm on record that we need to have some way to mentor and teach younger men to be prepared to take on the challenges that's going to be down the road. Right, Jeff? Now look, I'm not volunteering for this. I'm just making, this would be a good project for you, somebody. But I think there's an important thing that Jesus is saying, like, I've got to have time with these guys. I've got to be able to tell them some things. I've got to be able to teach them some things. And as I look at the world and the people that I encounter and the adult students that I work with, there's a lot of that missing. There's not teaching going on in some ways that needs to be done. So just throwing that out there, all right? He goes from there, as we saw, to the opposite side, almost opposite side of the world, opposite side of where he is. They're going over to the Defiles, again, Gentile territory. We're talking about maybe a couple hundred miles, I think, that he would have traveled from up in Tyre and Sidon, going across the Jordan, going down to Defiles. And it says, he went out from the region of Tyre and Sidon, within the region of Defiles. They brought to him one who was deaf and spoke with difficulty, and they implored him to lay his hand on him. As I was reading different commentaries about this, there was an interesting thing that I came across. This man was deaf, and he spoke with difficulty. And naturally, if you can't hear yourself, then you're going to speak with difficulty. And it kind of gave the idea that this guy was probably a nuisance or an embarrassment because he's trying to communicate with people. He has no idea how it's coming out. He can't hear from people. And I read somewhere there was, what would have been worse back then, to be deaf or to be blind? And most people thought it would have been, worst thing to do would be blind. But there was some research done with people who are blind, said no. If I'm blind, I can't see, but if I can still hear and talk, I can still communicate, I can learn, but if you can see but you can't hear and you can't communicate with people, it is incredibly frustrating. So they bring this guy to Jesus, and it says, Jesus took him aside from the crowd by himself. It was almost, as you read it, it's almost like they brought this guy almost as a freak show. Here, Jesus, see if you can fix this guy. And I get the feeling it was very maybe humiliating for this man. And so Jesus is going to heal him, but he's not going to do it just to satisfy. He's going to take him, and he takes him away privately, probably with his disciples, get somewhere private, maybe into a house. And then he does, again, some very strange things. It says he put his fingers in his ears, and after spitting, he touched his tongue with the saliva. Now, I know that probably grosses every woman in this room out. What I've read, though, is that what Jesus was doing, he's trying to communicate almost in sign language to this man what he's going to do. He puts his fingers in his ears as if to say, I'm fixing to give you your hearing. Now, I read several different things trying to figure out, okay, I get that. But spitting and then putting it on his tongue, that just seems a little... But he's trying to tell that guy I'm going to make it where you can speak. Now, having said this, back before we had wipes all over the place, how many of you moms in here at some point have not spit on a napkin or something to wipe your children's mouth? Is anybody going to confess? Okay, all right. So we have put our saliva on another human being. This is not a totally foreign thing. Maybe the tongue, okay, a little extreme, but he's trying to get this point across to this guy. And so it says, and looking up to heaven with a deep sigh, he said to him, be opened. His ears were opened, and the impediment of his tongue was removed, and he began to speak plainly. And then Jesus does something that still I always laugh at. And he gave them orders not to tell anyone. But the more he ordered them, the more they widely continued to proclaim it. I can't remember. I think it was our daughter Avery. I can't remember when she was young. I don't even remember the situation, but we had bought a present for someone and wrapped it. And I don't know what was in the package, but I think she told, okay, Mom says, I can't tell you that there's a pair of shoes in this box. It doesn't matter with kids. You tell them not to say anything, and you can just guarantee they're going to do it. They're going to do it. And for Jesus to tell this guy, this man now can hear, this man can talk plainly, maybe for the first time in his life. And Jesus says, okay, Dennis, don't tell anybody. And I'm like, are you serious? Really? For the first time this guy can talk. It's like, I'm going to tell everyone. I can't wait till I haven't talked. He's going to talk nonstop. When I read this, though, I thought about he can't wait to tell people of what Jesus has done for him. But who are we telling about Jesus? Do we have the same desire to tell people about Jesus that this man did? I'm going to tell him myself a little bit. Dennis, I saw Dennis several years ago over at Landmark, and just, by the way, I hope at some point in time that we get him here and his wife to do the presentation they did at Landmark. Because you will be touched, I promise you. It'll change your life. But when I saw Dennis, had not seen him in years, and his wife, and so he said, oh yeah, we remember you. And when people say that, my first thought is, okay, what are they remembering? Is this going to be a good story or is this going to be bad? Because when I think about this guy here, I think about, okay, I graduated in 1977 with a degree in Bible and psychology. And when I walked out of the Gaines facility that day, I had a piece of paper that said I had a degree in Bible. And it was worthless. I could condemn your soul to hell a dozen different ways because I knew all the rules and I knew all the laws. But I could not tell you about Jesus. Because I didn't have it. I didn't have a relationship with him. I knew this book here to be able to pass a test, to get a degree. But I didn't have it in my heart. And it took a long time. My wife can attest to that. And I had to get humbled a lot before I realized that you got to have a relationship with Jesus before you can tell someone about Jesus. You can't bring someone to someone that you don't know. And I had to realize, okay, I've got to spend time in this. I've got to spend time in prayer. And I've got to have this in my heart before I can tell someone else. And it seems that sometimes the most enthusiastic people about wanting to bring people to Jesus are people who have really come from a tough situation. And for those of us like me who grew up in the church and had all those opportunities, don't always have that urgency and that desire, need to do that. So sometimes we have to learn the hard way. I did. Still learning. So as we finish up here with chapter 7, there's the key things I want you to remember is, number one, you don't have to feed the 5,000. You just bring God what you got. You bring him the loaves and the fish and let him do it. Number two, don't ever underestimate whatever gift you have, because whatever gift or talent you have, God has given it to you. Use it. Put it to work. Put it to work. Spend time alone, away from everything else, developing that relationship, and then when you have the opportunity, tell others about him. Tell him then what he has done for you. Let's close in prayer. Father, thank you so much for giving us this time to be in your word, to learn from what your son tried to teach us, what he tried to teach others. And help us realize, Father, that as we read about the frustrations that he had with his disciples, that you get frustrated with us today as well. And help us not to look with too critical eyes about how hard it was for them to understand, until we realize that sometimes we need to work on our own shortcomings. But we thank you that we have the blessing of your Son, and that we have your word, and we have the opportunity to learn and to grow and to be better one day at a time. Thank you again for this opportunity. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.